So let me let you know when I'm live on Facebook.
Okay, I'll turn the video on once we're live. Oh, we're live now?
Let's see. It's still loading, so okay, now we're live.
All right. I'll put the camera on momentarily. Here we go. Hello, WebCon 2020. My name is Silver Soul Gaming Preston, but you can just call me Preston for short. Here is my business card with my email and my logo. And as you see on the bottom, at SSG Preston on Linktree. This card was designed by my mother, who owns a crafting shop called Paint Happy Designs. Make sure you check her and her designs out. So, with all that shameless promotion out of the way, as well as for Silver Soul Gaming and the Rebel Gaming Club on YouTube, let's get into what this panel is about. So, if you're like me, you love retro video games just as much as you love like PC gaming and the modern consoles like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, the Nintendo Switch, and the upcoming consoles like the PS5 and the Series X. But what if you're like me and you want to play on retro consoles, but you don't have a ye old tube TV or CRT TV that is preferable for retro gaming because of things like pixels and input lag and stuff like that, like the screen looking, the pixelated screen looking very grainy and washed out. Never fear, there are solutions out there. They might be a little bit pricey for you, but they grow on you. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to demonstrate how to get an Atari 2600 to work on an HDMI screen with no hard mods whatsoever. So, as you know, the Atari 2600 came out in 1977. It was a wood grain machine with 6 or 4 switches, depending on which model you got, and had a stellar library of games. And this was back when Atari was actually doing things properly, and they weren't causing, certain crashes. And as you know, without hard modding anything in the Atari 2600, the only video output that it uses is something called RF, radio frequency. It's the coaxial antenna cable that you see on like those really old TVs. Now there are video converters out there where you can like do composite to HDMI or S-video to HDMI or VGA or component or SCART to HDMI. You get the picture. But there doesn't seem to be one for RF to HDMI. And there doesn't even seem to be one for RF to composite. So basically you're screwed, right? Well, not entirely. So let me take the Atari 2600 right here. Oops, and there goes the card. Let me turn the camera around. If possible, come on screen, work with me here. Okay, so here's, of course, what the Atari 2600 looks like. The switches, as I mentioned. And if we flip around to the back, we've got the power adapter. The AV cord for this thing is always attached to the Atari 2600. If you pull that off by mistake, you're kind of in a pickle. But we're not here to talk about that kind of pickle. So, if there are no RF to composite converters out there, what can you use? Well, look what this thing is standing on top of. It's a VCR. Remember these things? I do. Specifically, it's a Zenith DVD VHS combo. But those technicalities aside, let's go to the back of this thing. And you'll see that the output is running a typical set of RCA composite cables from the VCR itself to this device, the RetroTank 2X Pro. I'll get more into that machine in a little bit. But as you see here, the AV cable from the Atari 2600 is plugged into the VCR's coaxial input. Now, what's that little nut right there that is holding that cable in place? Well, give me a minute to unplug this, and I'll show you. So here's the aforementioned cable. And this thing that's screwed in there very tightly is something called a, oh gosh dang it, I forgot the name. But basically, if you screw it into, it's a little tiny adapter that you would get at like Radio Shack or something like that. And you screw it into the coaxial input. And basically, the end right here provides a small enough hole for something like the Atari 2600 AV cable to fit in. So the VCR now has the Atari 2600 input. The question is, what about the output? As previously mentioned, the composite cables. Now, one thing to note though, the Atari 2600 only does native mono sound, not stereo. So this doesn't magically give you an Atari 2600 with stereo audio. Instead, it's just mono audio split into whatever amount of channels or speakers that your sound system has. So in my case, a mono signal split in two for a set of two speakers, which means stereo. Now, we're going to take a look at this device that the composite cables are plugged into. It's called the RetroTank 2X Pro. Along with another device that I'll talk about shortly, this device is very, very important if you want to play old consoles like these on an HDMI screen without making the screen look grainy or introduce a lot of input lag. Input lag is a huge no-no for us serious gamers, isn't it? So, as you see here, this machine takes composite, S-video, and component. And it also has different buttons and switches to change the input that's being used, a filter, as in a screen filter, where you can change the look of the screen, give it that old CRT filter if you wish. You can double the lines, which means that if you're feeding in a 240p signal, you can switch it to 2x, and it'll become 480p. And then there's the pass-through, which is like retro to auto. You can choose whichever one you think is best. So, that being said, the composite is plugged into the RetroTank, as you see here. Now, here we have, and I'm not going to go over the model. It's not important right now. We've got a typical 24-inch HDMI input computer monitor. And it's actually in 4K, but this thing only does 480p. Another device goes up to 1080p, but we'll get to that later. So, all we have to do now is make sure that the VCR is on, which it is. And what we do now, we're going to turn on the power of the Atari 2600, which has Circus Atari in it. Okay, no screen yet. Let me just push the buttons on the RetroTank to get it to come on. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem. This monitor does not want to accept the RetroTank, it seems. Yeah, terribly sorry about that, people. But that technical error aside, that is indeed how you hook up an Atari 2600 to a VCR and hook the VCR up to the RetroTank 2X Pro into an HDMI monitor. If you've got a console that uses composite or S-video, like, you know, the N64, the original PlayStation, the Sega 32X, which is technically an add-on for the Sega Genesis. If you've got, yeah, basically any console that uses composite or S-video, RetroTank 2X Pro, that's the guy you want to rely on right there. You can also use a PS2 on it. I recommend if you're going to use something component, just save that for the PS2. Other component consoles, we'll save for the next device, and I'll finally get into that one. So if you're going to use a console that doesn't use composite or S-video, you turn to this, which is called the open source scan converter. The inputs on this thing are SCART or SHART, I don't entirely remember how to pronounce that, component, and if we flip over here, VGA. So if you're like me, you have VGA cables for your Sega Dreamcast. You can use the component input for like the original Xbox, the Nintendo Wii, the PS2, although the PS2 would probably be preferable in the RetroTank, but that's a discussion for another time. Other SCART consoles include the Sega Saturn, I believe the Super Nintendo Entertainment System has one as well. There's all kinds of consoles that use all these different kinds of video inputs, and they all output HDMI. One thing to note, though, is that the OSSC, if you want audio from it, if you're using VGA or component video, you're going to have to get those little headphone jack things and plug it in here if you want this when you want the stereo audio. That cannot be helped, unfortunately. Don't look at me. You're going to have to talk to the inventor of this thing about it. So that is a brief rundown of how to get retro gaming consoles working properly on HDMI screens. So we got about 15 minutes left in this panel. Do any of you have any questions? Let's look in the chat. I'm just sitting here waiting for any questions if you've got any. And I do apologize once again for my monitor not playing ball with the RetroTank, no matter what I did. Do I use any emulators? No, I am not an emulator person. I understand why people like those emulators where you download ROMs off the internet, provided you're doing it legally. Like that, that's just not for me. I prefer doing it as properly and officially as possible. If I have to use emulation to use it for like the virtual console on like the Wii U or like the NES and SNES services for Nintendo Switch Online, or like the Xbox backwards compatibility thing, or the PlayStation backwards compatibility, that's as far as I'll go, basically. Other than that, I'm just not a fan of emulators. I mean, more power to you if you like them, but just not for me. You know what I'm saying? What is the difference in gaming experience between emulators and your current setup? Very good question, Crystal. So, with emulators, they do have a history of introducing input lag. If you go on like different forums, and especially Reddit, you will know that let me turn the camera around first. There we go. So with emulators, they do have a really bad track record of introducing input lag unless you're doing it on a computer monitor or an HD TV that has a quote unquote game mode. That can really get rid of a lot of input lag, whether or not it gets rid of the input lag entirely is just like a 50-50 chance. And that's part of the reason why I usually prefer, or I pretty much always prefer, the real deal, especially because with certain emulators, there's some stuff you just can't do. Like, it most likely won't have the online or ad hoc multiplayer. It won't have the transferring, like the PS2 to PSP, or like the N64 transfer pack, that sort of thing. More often than not, you won't get those in third-party emulators. It sucks, but even the Mona Lisa's falling apart. Very, very good pair of questions on your part, Crystal. Thank you very much. And I say that with no sarcasm. Your questions were legitimately good. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Does my setup work with other retro systems outside of Atari? Yes, for sure, it does. I've used systems like the Wii on this setup. I've used the original Xbox. I've used the PS2. I've used. I'm gonna test out. I've tested out the Sega Saturn, more specifically the Sega Saturn with Sonic Jam in it. It works too. I don't think I've tried the Dreamcast on this thing yet, but that's coming up soon. I still don't understand why the Atari didn't work with the RetroTank for this demonstration. Maybe it's the monitor, maybe it's the VCR. I don't know. It worked on other monitors, so I'm not entirely sure what the deal is. I guess this one monitor I'm using isn't really enjoying this setup. Might have to invest in a CRT instead. But if you don't have the money or desk space or whatever reason you can't have the CRT, you have the RetroTank and the open source to help you out. Does it work with modern consoles like Xbox One? With the RetroTank and OSSC, unfortunately, they do not have HDMI inputs. Therefore, unless of course you got like HDMI to component converters, and you put that in the and you take the cables outputting from said converter into the RetroTank or the OSSC, it's not going to be compatible with stuff like the One. Emulators are difficult to save game progress. Does your setup do that? If you're asking whether my little converter thingies save game progress, no, they're not here to help out with saving games. The only thing that they're built to do is provide a clear looking, input lag free experience when it comes to playing retro consoles on modern screens. I don't mind you asking that at all, Crystal. How did I learn how to do this setup? Well, that mainly comes from my YouTube influences, people I've met at conventions, and just Google searches I've done in my spare time. YouTubers like GameSack, Retro RGB, Classic Game Room, etc. Old school channels like that will definitely help you out with hooking up these old consoles in the manner that I have shown in this panel, including Classic Game Room has a near 15-minute video on hooking an Atari 2600 up to a VCR and plugging that VCR into a modern television. Oh, come on, Crystal. Why do we have to ask the really hard questions here? That's at least the $64,000 one. It's all right. No hard feelings. My favorite game system, my answer to that could change pretty much daily. Like today I could say the Nintendo 64. Tomorrow I could say the Nintendo Wii. Day after that I could say the Sega Genesis. I really wouldn't be able to narrow it down for you. I can't name my all-time favorite console. There's just, I played so many good games on so many like relevant, iconic, important systems in our beloved video game industry that they've had a hand in me not being able to choose very well. That's an even harder question. The favorite games one? Oh boy. I would say games I've played lately that are like addicting. I mean, I've played Sonic Jam recently on the Sega Saturn, which is technically a compilation of Sonic the Hedgehog games from the Sega Genesis, which have been given the ports treatment. They're not emulations. They're ports onto the Sega Saturn. That's one of my favorites. Been playing a lot of Tiger Woods PGA Tour 14 and Tony Hawk's American Wasteland, among others. I really like sports games, and I could ramble on about that for ages, but I'm not going to in this panel. And do I ever, from person to everyone, not sure why you're labeled just as person. I mean, maybe you did it on purpose, I don't know, but that's okay. Do I ever capture game footage for later review or video projects? Well, on my old YouTube channel, I did that via capture devices from companies like Elgato and Hapag. Have I done that for my current YouTube channel? Unfortunately, I have not, but I do plan to very soon. I just got to find the right time to do so. Because with the world we live in and how hectic and busy my personal life is, it's just very difficult to find the time and money to do stuff like that. But, never say never. Okay, so my YouTube channel is simply called SSG Preston, and there's no underscore. It's just a space in between the G and the Preston. And this is going to be a complex answer on my end, so I hope you don't mind, Crystal. I had a few videos where I show off the games I've gotten and my setup. Occasionally, two of my close friends have appeared in it. I also had a video of me at PAX East 2020. And I did a video explaining my now defunct Patreon page. But all those 3 videos are removed. I think they're just privated, though, not actually deleted. The reason for it, not because I'm done with YouTube. I've just been focusing on so much stuff outside of YouTube videos that I'm going to give my YouTube channel a quote-unquote soft reboot. But the entire list of reasons for it is for another time, because we've only got about 3 minutes left, I believe. But I'll happily get into it in other places. Oops, wrong button. Where is it? Where's chat? There we go. What are you planning on doing with the reboot? I can't mention anything too specific because who doesn't like surprises, but it's basically going to be a bunch of refined content. Like some clips of mine that I privated will no longer be visible. Some of them will be visible again, but re-edited and refined. And as for videos that I plan to do in the future, nothing specific, but like a bunch of Let's Plays and collaborations and more vlogs and a whole bunch of other stuff I have right up here in my little noggin. That's about as brief as I could answer that without giving away like major spoilers or anything. Do I do tech professionally? Unfortunately, I do not, but I mean, maybe one day in the future, maybe I'll start doing that. Never say never. All right, 1 minute to go. So get your best questions in. Make your last question your best one. Or your first question really good. Bonus points if you ask something that makes me laugh. Am I having fun at WebCon? You're damn right I am, Crystal. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be doing this panel. This is honestly a very, very good time. I'm meeting incredible people, and being given the opportunity to run my first ever panel, in my first ever convention panel in my life. Like, you guys watching, you have no idea what that means to me. Like, that this is something I've wanted to do for ages, and my dream has finally come true. And it's thanks not only thanks to my hard work that I've done, it's thanks to you guys and gals that have given me this opportunity. And I thank you so much for that. So it's 12:30. We are technically out of time. So if you watch this, or if you're going to watch it later, thank you. With all my heart, thank you. My panel was amazing, says Crystal. Well, your con is more amazing than my panel. I say that with no reluctance. Like, this is honestly, WebCon is a fantastic experience. I hope we can do more of these in the years to come. So thank you for watching this panel, everybody. My name is SSG Preston, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, Eric.